Hello and welcome to Your Employment Matters. I'm Beverly Williams and I'm here to help you navigate your career. This is for anyone who's searching for their dream job or promotion, or perhaps you're just looking to hang on to the job you have. Today's work environments are multi-generational, multi-religious, multinational, multiracial, and multi-gender identity. Add market disruptors like Amazon and Lyft, along with the addition of AI, and it's easy to see why finding and keeping a job is such a challenge. Employment success and even employment survival depend on your ability to adapt. That's why my goal for this 30-minute podcast is to first advocate embracing change and differences, and second, to encourage you to proactively assume responsibility for your career. Get your work week off to a good start by listening to Your Employment Matters every Monday. Find out how to own your career and get the best practices for making your employment matter. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Your Employment Matters. Today, it's my privilege to interview, really just discuss anything we really want to, but really the focus today will be on labor relations, labor law, to the extent that it's not a deep dive into labor law, because we want to give people information about unionism, labor management relations. But we also want to share with people how my guests arrived on this path. There's so many different paths that they could have taken. And fortunately for me, I met them because I became a member of a professional organization. And in previous podcast interviews, I've shared with you how important I think it is for you to get out and meet people and network and enhance your marketability by meeting people and getting involved in different projects that are offered either in a nonprofit or perhaps in a hospital as a volunteer. But the more people you know and you meet who may not look like you, may not think like you, in my opinion, makes all of us better people. So I met my guest today because I joined an organization. Now, my problem is I didn't feel the need to do so early in my career. And as my career winds down, I'm finding that I missed a great deal. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to three attorneys from the Selikoff and Cohen law firm in New Jersey, Southern New Jersey. I'm not going to introduce them by giving you a brief bio. I'm going to let them tell you what they want you to know about themselves. And then we're going to discuss whatever topic comes up. I can start it, but we'll go wherever it takes us. How about that? So, Liz, you want to go first? Liz Pudel, Daniel Dowdy, and Hop Wechsler. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I know that you share my interest in sharing information about labor relations and labor management. And you three have not a unique, but perhaps not an unfamiliar side of labor law. So, Liz, why don't you go first? You came on the platform first. We'll go that way and then we'll do it clockwise.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us, Beverly. I think even in just thinking about what we were going to talk about, it's exactly what you touched on, is that we all came here by different paths, but now we're all doing this work and we bring a different perspective. So my name is Liz Pudel. I am the newest attorney at Selikoff and Cohen. I moved down to I guess I work in South Jersey, but I moved down to Philadelphia about 2 years ago from Brooklyn, where I was born and raised. So I joined the ranks of many expats from Brooklyn. who are now working and living in or around the Jersey area. The reason that I really moved down here is because after law school, I knew that I really wanted to work in the labor movement, and that was my singular goal. And when I was looking at places where I wanted to do that work, Selikoff and Cohen was just the place that most motivated me and what made me most excited about doing the work. And I think part of that is that the work that Selikoff and Cohen does is for public sector workers and public sector unions predominantly. And that really made me excited because I think they are the backbone. Public sector workers are the backbone of society. They provide the services that make society run. And that's really what I wanted to do. I didn't go to law school right out of college. I thought I was going to go into academia. I was in marketing. I mean, I've really been all over the map, but I'm here because the core of everything that I saw in all of those areas was just how fundamental the workforce is to making society thrive. And I realized that I just fundamentally wanted to do things to help workers get ahead the best that they can in a world that seems to adamantly not want them to. So that's kind of why I'm here. And I'm excited to talk to you today.
Well, I think you're a good example of you don't have to graduate from high school or college knowing exactly what you want to do, that there's a path forward. You might diverge, but eventually trial and error, and there's no harm in that. I don't think people
Absolutely.
have to have certainty with respect to their careers right off the bat. And I think that's important for people to know. So thank you for sharing that with us. Daniel, you
Of
want to talk
course.
about your
Of course.
beginning?
So, Dan Dowdy, also at Selikoff and Cohen. I've been closing out my 6th year with the firm. And I grew up in Wisconsin, about 15 minutes outside of Milwaukee, and then moved down to Milwaukee where I did my undergrad studies and also bartended while I was doing that, usually a couple jobs at a time. And really, I think those two things impacted me wanting to get into labor, which studying history and studying the history of immigration and labor, which are kind of hand in hand, really led me down a path of learning about the labor movement I wouldn't have otherwise had and the treatment of workers during the Industrial Revolution to now. And then the other side of that being while I was also bartending, which is, the service industry is notoriously the most difficult to organize as far as labor goes and can be. I had good experiences myself, but it can be very exploitative as well. And so those two things led me to wanting to get into labor more. And I ended up coming out here for law school at Rutgers. I got a pretty good tuition, and that led me out here about 10 years ago. And once I started studying labor, it was all over. I didn't want to do anything but labor and union side labor. And then I clerked for 1 year in criminal in Camden, which was a lot of fun to do for a temporary period of time, but definitely not in the long run. And then started at Selikoff and Cohen right after that.
So now you, as a bartender, that formed at least part of your perspective
Completely.
as you move forward and decided what your career path would be. You knew you didn't want to be a bartender as a career, but that was something that helped you formulate your career plan as a labor attorney. And I think that's important for people to realize too. Whether you've been a babysitter or a candy striper, and whether it's a paid job or an unpaid job, every role that you may have had in your lifetime contributes to who you are as a person and can help you formulate who you want to become as a professional, whether it's a professional in the trades, a professional in the service industry. I don't use professional to mean you have to go to college. Everyone does not have to go to college, but you have to have skills. You have to acquire a talent, something that you can market. And the better people realize that, because wishing and hoping ain't going to make it happen. And you can watch television all you want and think that you're going to be a basketball player or a dancer or whatever. You have to be, there's training that is necessary. And whatever training that is, plumbers make a lot of money, you know?
Yeah. Absolutely.
The
Mhm.
electricians make a lot of money. If you are concerned about, oh, college is not for me, just because the four of us are lawyers doesn't mean that we advocate college for everyone. It's not suited for everyone's not suited for college, and college is not suited for everyone. So thank you for sharing that. That's an important nugget for people to
Couldn't
take
agree more.
away. Pop, what about you?
First of all, I like, in keeping with the traditional, non-traditional labor theme, I like that we're not going in order of seniority here. Now, as far as my personal connection to the working world and labor and employment, I don't know how much of a bio, how much of a growing up geography, that kind of thing we need, other than I will say I did grow up in Philadelphia, at least in the broader Kobe Bryant sense of growing up in Philadelphia, if not Philadelphia city limits at all times, although I did live within city limits for at least a decade. There's my connection to law, and then my connection to labor and employment bringing me back to law. I actually wanted to be a lawyer when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old. And then I went and did other things for the next maybe 40 years before coming back to, and at least actually becoming a lawyer, maybe 35 years before coming back to law, and then 40 years before actually becoming a lawyer. During that time, at least my working adult life, I was a temp, I was riffed, I was unemployed, I went through outplacement, I was on Cobra, I was a freelancer, I'm married to an adjunct, I have family members who switched jobs, who resigned in lieu of resignation, in lieu of termination, an uncle whose offices were involuntarily downsized until at one point he ended up working out of a broom closet. So I have different personal perspectives on being a casualty in the labor process in one way or another. So by the time I went back to, actually I went back to paralegal school first after 13 years in specifically two different positions for a medical publisher, one of which was, they were both quasi legal related. I worked in copyright permissions for 5 years, and then as a journal publisher, which did involve some amount of contract experience, contract negotiation and execution, and a lot of profit and loss statements I couldn't care less about for the next 8 or 9 years, at which point I was riffed. And after being unemployed for 2 years during the Great Recession, during which time our great Pennsylvania governor at that point said that he didn't want to extend unemployment any longer because it would basically enable people who didn't want to work, who would then be sitting at home. But luckily, the federal government thought otherwise at that point in time. Under a prior, kinder, gentler administration, I found my way back to paralegal school and a paralegal job for an immigration paralegal, just as my 2 year extended unemployment was running out. From that point, I started law school, went back into publishing to be able to pay my mortgage with a single paycheck rather than a paycheck and a half, given what a paralegal was earning in Philadelphia, and then worked during the day at another copyright permissions position for a second publisher while going to law school at night on the evening plan for 5 years. Actually, going, the last thing I'm going to say over what has already been too long an extended meditation on law is that I was on the 5 year plan in part because I stuck it out. I took a semester off and then extended it an extra semester just because I wanted to take employment discrimination and it wasn't offered for another cycle. So I waited it out and got special dispensation to take no classes and then come back to take employment discrimination and graduate at that point. So I knew what I wanted to do by that point.
Wow. But you know, Hop, you raised a lot of terms that unfortunately I'm sure that some people are familiar with from personal experience, and others may have heard about and hopefully haven't had the personal experience. Reductions in force, severance. I don't know whether you mentioned severance, but there were words, terms that you use that go along with the ever changing workforce, the changes in the laws on discrimination, the laws on notifying people that there's going to be a large layoff. Their rights under that, COBRA. As much as things change, they remain the same. And unfortunately, everyone doesn't have a true picture of what the employment landscape is like now. It's volatile. But for some reason, I think people think, oh, well, I'm going to be fine. I have a college education. And if they haven't been disabused of that notion, I don't know what planet they're on. Because college is not going to save you, and it's not going to get you promoted 6 months after you start working for a new employer. But I find it troubling that when I read the newspaper online or talk to people, it's like people think that because they've achieved a certain, call it status, whether it's graduating from college, whether it's getting a certificate, some kind of additional training, that's all there is that they need to do, that in and of itself is going to save them and propel them forward. And it doesn't really work that way. I don't know that it did in the past, but at least in years gone by, if you worked at a certain company and the company had a paternal attitude toward its employees, then you had some kind of job security. But I guess that's why you guys are in business well, I represent management, you represent labor, but that's why you do what you do so that you can protect people's rights.
Well said.
It's amazing to me. Well, let's go start clockwise again. What do you see? This bot troubles me too, although I'm going to ask the question, what do you see as the future of work? Because I don't know that anybody can tell you.
I think that's right. I think it's just increasingly challenging, becoming increasingly particularized within every field. Every field and every industry is changing. And I think that's why you're underscoring, Beverly, the need to be adaptable and to always be able to change is increasingly important. And I think part of that is recognizing that the only thing that might remain constant are the structures around work, not necessarily work itself, which I think really underscores why unionism is important, because as the specifics of every industry, of every job might change over time, the thing that you can understand is general. And again, this will change too, but generally the relationship between the worker and their bosses. And baked into that relationship between workers and bosses is hopefully the mediating force of a union that can represent the collective interests of the workforce. So I think really the things that we know will remain constant are just the basics, but everything around it is really shifting and shifting rapidly.
No, it's true. And it's troubling. And the vernacular changes. You said, I forgot which word you used, but it's like pivot. They
Mhm.
have to be adaptable. I think you said adaptable. People have to pivot.
That's right.
Okay, today it's pivot. Next week, it could be another word that means the same thing. And if you don't keep up with the change in the language, you may not even be able to communicate. Daniel, what do you do? How do you feel about the future of
Yeah,
work?
I think that to even be able to speculate about the future of work, you have to look at the history of work, right? You got to look at automation, and you got to look at the Industrial Revolution and the fears that, out of automation. And when people came from agricultural societies in the United States, moving into the factories because of various things, perhaps in partially invention of certain devices that made agricultural work less labor intensive, and then you move it into the factories, and then there are fears of, okay, well, this machine is going to put everybody out of work. We have the same thing going on with AI right now. And I think that's the next big fear is of course, which jobs is it going to have the capacity to take over, and which jobs is it not going to be able to do so well? Right now, I don't think from the legal perspective, it's doing a very good job yet. I think it may in the future, but there obviously needs to be people involved in the law, or you're going to end up with just these AI hallucinations that nobody's stopping at some point. And I think that for a lot of fields, I think we're looking at the early stages of job replacement right now from AI, just like when they had certain automation that could put car parts together. It's the same thing. Obviously, the car industry didn't end up doing great in the United States, partially because of globalization, partially because of automation. But you look at AI, and I think that is the next automation. It's just not in the factory anymore. It's in the mind.
We've always been able to adjust. I mean, through each phase. Technology, that was a huge thing. I mean, I'm not a typist, but I can type.
Mhm.
I mean, I was so happy because I could type my own papers because of the software, because of technology. And I was thrilled, but there were people who were put off by technology. And that was, it was pre AI, but it was computers. No, we don't need computers. That typewriter, that ball doesn't move. It just turns. It doesn't move. The carriage doesn't move. We can't use that. But I try to encourage people to be open-minded about changes. If you're resistant to change, you will not fare well. You just won't. And the other thing is to be not respectful, but understand that everyone brings something to the table, whether it's different demographic, age-wise, different races, gender, whatever. Everybody has something to offer. And the more you associate with people who are different, the more information and knowledge you acquire. If it's only about the food that they eat, I love to go to my friends, and I'm very fortunate that I have a very eclectic group of friends, but I like to go to their friends and eat their food. They come to my house and eat my food. I mean, it's joyous because it's good. I mean, we're talking about good food. It's not like they can't cook. Hop, what about you? How do you view the future of work?
I also took that as an AI question, and I can go a couple different ways on that. I guess you can call it anti-alarmist versus alarmist in that order. The anti-alarmist take, which has been my take all along, or maybe was my take all along, is that AI doesn't actively take anyone's job. What jobs, when the answer to the question, what jobs is AI going to take away or not, is really, I always took it as a who has labor power and who doesn't, which doesn't mean there's a great answer to it necessarily, because then that second question has to be answered. It isn't always going to be answered well, but it's really AI will only take away jobs, and this at least was my thinking, which I'll get to. AI will only take away jobs if certain people let it, enough people let it, and where there is labor power around. I mean, we largely represent teachers or school employees, and including teachers, and that's an issue with instruction in certain areas. I know it's an issue in higher ed in some ways that it isn't in K through 12 and in charter schools, for example, and in certain private schools, that it isn't in public schools. It's different. Obviously, contexts may vary, mileage may vary, but to what degree can a virtual platform, a virtual instructor replace a live flesh and blood instructor? It really comes down to what, say, is there a union? What say does the union have? Is the union at the table? If the union's not at the table, what power does the union have after the fact? And I think that the one reference point for that is Dean Baker, the economist, has written on industries that are protected from offshoring, outsourcing versus those that aren't. And I know he's written about medicine. I don't know if he's written about law, but medicine in particular, that when the wave of offshoring hit in the 90s, which I can tell you about personally from publishing, you never heard about doctors being offshored. And instead you heard about protectionists, the law as it stands about who can practice medicine in the US, and basically the gatekeepers, the thresholds that you had to go through if you were not a US trained doctor. It was the opposite. You couldn't offshore other doctors here, let alone
weren't those restrictions already in place? Licensing and you know,
exactly
certain requirements before offshoring.
Exactly, that there are certain industries that and they remained, whereas with other jobs, I guess the default was a restriction that was slowly lifted or quickly lifted. The Band-Aid was pulled off in the late 80s, early 90s, and post NAFTA accelerating for certain other industries, whereas for the protected classes, in that sense of the word, but things never changed for them. And that's that was my thinking in AI, that it's going to be where there's labor power or just financial power, structural advantages. Those jobs aren't the jobs that are going to be lost to AI, that they're going to be decisions, at least implicitly made, on which jobs can we afford to lose. And that's still my thinking, but I don't know. I'm not one to say the robots have a mind of themselves. The robots are going to take over. But at the same time, I do think I'm coming around on the idea that I guess the overwhelming, the logic of late capitalism, that that there are going to be cost advantages to having AI do more and more, even in those industries that we thought were protected. So I am seeing more of a risk than I was at one point, that we can afford. It doesn't matter if things aren't done quite as well, as long as they're done more efficiently, I think is going to be, when push comes to shove, I have a sinking feeling that might be the answer.
The cost benefit analysis is going to be ever present, no question about it. But there's also going to be quality control. If AI produces a poor product, who's going to buy it? Somebody might buy it once, but then the word goes out, oh, this is crap. Then that's going to affect the bottom line. The bottom line is what you have to keep your mind focused on. That's going to be the driver. People don't like to hear it, but it's a fact. It's a cruel fact in some regards, but it's a fact. If it doesn't drive the bottom line and shareholder value, then it'll be around, but it won't be in use. But people need to know how to use it. There's a certain amount of information, reliable information and intelligence that you need to use. Like I hear some attorneys are submitting AI generated briefs, and some of the cases cited don't even exist or don't even stand for the proposition asserted. I mean, that's just stupid. But there are people out there that are doing that, and they're lawyers.
I will add to that. We did just see a demo of an AI product, a certain research tool that I will not name. And the example that was used by the person performing the demo involved, knowing that we practiced labor and employment law, was an employee who was accused of stealing. Do you remember what the hypo was? Stealing some sort of an object. and it went through, can you fire the person for, was it a theft of time, or was it a theft of an actual object? And no, theft of time, I guess, with time cards. And he was accused of this. Can you terminate him? Is it termination without just cause? If all sorts of things. And it went through what the law was over theft of time. Nowhere in it, when it reached the conclusion that it did it mention the fact that you have to prove that the employee did it. It just assumed that, oh, he's accused of theft of time, so that means he's guilty of theft and time. It skipped the entire determination of guilt process, which seems like it's pretty critical before you can reach the can you fire the employee.
See, and that only has to happen a few times, and the word goes out, and whatever AI company that is, their stock is going to tank. If you don't have a reliable product, it's not going anywhere, not for long. I was writing a paper and I said, I'd never worked with AI before, but I said, let me see if I can get an outline. And it generated an outline for me. Now, I didn't use the entire outline, but it helped me formulate where I wanted to go and how I wanted to get there. I'm risk averse. I just am. If anybody tells you that I've done anything illegal, you don't know me, but I'm telling you, they're lying. I'm not doing anything to jeopardize my license or my freedom. But there's some people that are very cavalier about such things. I don't understand it, but I could see using it for an outline or tell me how I can get this done. Well, who do I need to talk to about this to reach this result? And it's used out. I'm impressed, but I'm also cautious because that's just my nature. But these people are not cautious enough. They don't know enough to challenge or to question what they see in these AI generated documents.
I think you're absolutely right. I think the real distinction, at least for me thus far, has been the difference between using it as a tool to the extent that it's helpful, recognizing that it can only be so helpful in certain circumstances, and outsourcing your professional obligations to a tool that you haven't verified. I think that's really the difference, at least as it currently stands and within our limited professional context. As soon as you start relying on technology like AI to fulfill your professional obligations, I think that's where you're really going to miss. That's where you're really going to miss. You can certainly use it to get you to a point where you feel comfortable saying, I feel good about having personally verified that I fulfilled my obligations here, but it's another thing entirely when we start relying on those tools. And I think that's really the distinction, at least in the way that we can and shouldn't use them.
Yeah. I think it's very helpful, but technology, computers, very helpful. But you gotta know how to spell, because this was before spell check. You gotta know how to spell. You gotta know to go to a dictionary. You can't be making up words. And anyone who doesn't realize that is gonna be in trouble. It's not going to bode well for them. So now, how has recent events changed, if it has, changed how you do business? Whether it's AI, whether it's changes in laws or approaches to laws, in law and legal enforcement. You mentioned immigration, that's a big ticket item. How has that affected what you do and how you do it? Did or has it?
I'm happy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just want to say, and then I'll turn the floor over, but I just want to preface anyone else's comments by saying we do state, we don't do federal, and we do New Jersey specifically, so we do still have labor law. And so it doesn't really, we're a little immune from some of the worst of the national trends.
But as I understand it, And quite frankly, I don't mind saying I haven't watched the news in months. But as I understand it, there are agents coming into workplaces, which would include, I would think, public sector workplaces and engaging in some kind of conduct. But they're just, things are different. It's a different environment. You know what I'm saying? The things that we took for granted in terms of just being able to walk the streets, that's changed.
At the same time, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I hate to be the guy that constantly brings everything back to history, but this is, in a way, just employment wise, Irish need not apply, whites only, in just a different perspective and just an updated perspective where they're just going after generically Hispanic workplaces and just checking everyone to see whether they have proper documentation, even taking green cards away on top of that and things like that. I mean, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And it's just blatant discrimination about people who are contributing taxes to our society and not taking any of the benefits from them and by working. So,
But even if they weren't contributing to
right.
society, they're
Exactly.
human beings.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, so if they're doing something illegal, we have due process, don't we? Last time I
Sometimes.
checked, you know, and make no apologies about referencing history. What's the those who do not learn from history are destined
Absolutely.
to repeat it? Well, this is we're
Mhm.
living it. And I think that's the problem. That's one of the problems. Not enough people have reliable information, know how government works, know how local and state government work. They believe what they hear, and it doesn't make any sense. I mean, logically, it doesn't make any sense, and they don't think because and I'm guilty of I'm guilty of it. On my Twitter feed, I will see something and I'll say that's not true, but I'm going to check. You know what I mean? I don't check everything. That doesn't make sense to me. Not enough people question what they see online. And online, the internet, social media has become the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. And when someone says, I did my research, then I look at the person and I think to myself, and what was that? What does that mean for you? But not to be an elitist, but one of my attorney's friends said that about something that was completely off base. I said, if you say that one more time to me, that's going to be a problem because I'm going to have to start looking at you differently because the perspective was so skewed and so just not right. Like you could Google it and you'll find that that's not right. If they don't take the next step, what is it? Reagan said, trust but verify. If they just did that, everyone's entitled to different opinions. But if you're going to believe just crazy stuff, then you're not serving yourself well and your loved ones. You're just not. But it's like there's no civics. Sometimes they don't even have music and the arts in schools anymore. And that's important, if only because it makes you smile. It makes you sing. I mean, it lightens your load. And I think that's part of the problem. Our load has become so heavy, we just don't feel like we have the energy to go and that extra step to verify what we're hearing and seeing and reading online. But I leave it to you guys because you are the ones that are, I don't want to sound like it's histrionic. You all are fighting for the workforce. I get that. My father was a union man. I grew up in a union house. He was not happy when, when I was negotiating the contracts against his not his friends, but people he knew, union officials he knew. Now, the fact that he knew them didn't mean that they treated me any better. So I am sympathetic to labor, but I think that, quite frankly, both labor and management need to get jiggy with it. They need to realize that acrimony and strikes are not serving anybody any good. Workers do not recoup what they've lost during protracted strikes. And the sooner they realize that, and everybody needs to come to the table with a singular mind. We're going to get what we need to get, and we're going to work this thing out with the least disruption.
If
How
only
about
it were
that?
so. If only it were
If
so.
only it were so. I'm trying to sell it. I'm trying to sell it. I haven't met a labor lawyer that would agree with me. And the management attorneys will not have anything to do with me. I said, don't you want to be on my podcast? And one of them said yes. And then he must have talked to somebody in his firm. And then he called me and said, no, I can't do it. I'm just saying, seriously, that Screen Actors Guild strike, $6 billion lost.
It's funny you mentioned that. I was just going to say, when you were saying that it's a lose-lose, my response to that was going to be the Writers Guild got a good deal out of that. So
doesn't matter. They didn't recoup the money they lost over those many weeks. I mean,
sometimes it is made up in other ways. I mean, with writers especially, the dangers of AI we were talking about are probably the most prevalent for writers out of any profession. And they got some good protections that could, protect them for a long time. So that was one good win.
That's important.
Yeah.
That's important. But suppose they don't get any more jobs. So they lost all that money from those weeks they were out on strike. They don't get that money back. And if they don't get any future jobs, they don't realize the benefit of the AI agreements that they've worked out. I mean, yeah, people need to wake up. They need to wake up. This is crazy. It really, and it's gotten worse. It really has got. When I saw that, I said and the Screen Actors strike affected Georgia workers, New York workers, California workers, and there's another one. I mean, really? They lost all that money, no money coming in, and it's not like at the end when they settled, the settlement was a good settlement, but they didn't recover the money they had lost. That can't be a win.
So while I should say we don't really deal, as a firm anyways, with striking because arguably teachers can't strike in New Jersey, I will say from a more personal standpoint and my perspectives on labor that there is the argument, of course, that the length of a strike is determined by the employer's willingness to come to the table.
I'm not putting all this on labor. I'm saying it needs to be better than a good faith effort because good faith efforts are not getting the job done.
Yeah.
That's all.
I think we need not look any further, really, than just a couple weeks ago in Philly, the DC 33 strike. I think the common refrain from the workforce really was, we want to get back to our jobs, but we also want to do it for a living wage. And I don't think that message is particularly complicated, but there was all of this resistance from the city about what it is that they could afford, and a lot of recalcitrance in making any movement. And really, at the end of the day, the party that made all the movement was labor, because they saw that the city wasn't really coming to them in good faith. And I think at the end of the day, it didn't, at least from the membership's perspective, a lot of people seemed unhappy with it. And there was a week-long strike and garbage pileups. And I don't think anyone is a stranger to what happened. And whether that's a victory is a question really only for the membership and the parties to negotiations. But I think at the end of the day, there was a need to voice the fact that people are not able to survive on what they are making, especially being the backbone of the city. It was so evident just over the course of a week how important they are. And yet it still wasn't recognized by management that these people are just so crucial and vital to the workforce, to the sustaining of the city, that they were worth making more than an average of $50,000 a year. I mean, it's kind of difficult to fathom the amount of money that those workers are expected to live off of doing the work that they do.
Well,
I mean, in general, but also doing the work that they do.
I've had this discussion with other people and non-lawyers. What is the living wage? I don't know what that is. And suppose everybody got $100,000. Everybody got $100,000. And I decided I want to buy only Louboutin shoes. That's all I want to wear.
That's not living, that's thriving.
Yeah. But are you going to dictate how I spend my money? You see that? See, living wage, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. There has to be some definition, some amount. And there has to be, first of all, I don't think healthcare should be tied to employment. A parent should not worry about taking his or her child to the doctor, whether they can afford it or not. They have a sick child, that child should have, even the parent should have health care. Simple. I mean, they're just basic needs of necessity, living and staying alive, paramount. Now, that, I don't know. I have very definite notions. I am a management attorney and I pull no punches when I negotiate. But they're just, I do have basic, when things don't make sense to me, I have to question it. It makes no sense. It makes no sense for me to see a child sick and the mother can't take the child to the doctor because they can't afford to. I mean, really? And there should be food on everybody's table. You can't, there's no, people, I mean, COVID. Now, I never threw away food. I mean, I've always, but since COVID and I saw those long lines with people lined up to get food, now, even if I don't want what's in that refrigerator, I will not throw it away. I will eat it before it goes bad because I feel very privileged. But I'm like, you can't throw away food. There are people who don't have sustenance.
And I think you're touching on exactly what it is to make a living wage. It's really just, can you meet the basic necessities of your life? Obviously, if you think that Louboutins are a basic necessity, that you're well within your right to believe that. But I think when we talk about the living wage,
You can't leave it to me to make that determination is what I'm saying. You can't leave it to people to make that determination because free will tell somebody that they need. I know someone who would live in Gucci. Now, they would buy Gucci loafers instead of food. Now, maybe we ought to do a communal thing and give everybody food and give them a card to take to the doctor if they needed to go to the doctor, and then give them a certain amount of money. If they wanted to spend that money on what I consider high-end frivolous things, then so be it. Then that's their money. You have to be able to regulate it some way because you can't leave people to their own devices. You can't.
Two quick points in that. One is my understanding of there isn't an exact number or even a geographic specific number on living wage, although that would get into a bit more of the nuance. I understand it as just like tort law. There is a reasonable wage standard, a reasonableness standard that applies to living wage, and there's unreasonably high, unreasonably low, and then just something that is a reasonable living wage. But also to your last point about essentially pooling resources and getting back to, I don't want to get all the way back to things lost and not lost during a strike, but traditionally that's one role that unions have had, is mutual aid during a strike so that nobody loses that much, so that the worst off among striking workers who can afford to lose the least would still be provided for by essentially a union slush fund. And I know we saw the concept of mutual aid resurface during COVID, speaking of which, that I know my town and other local communities in South Jersey had a mutual aid organization that delivered food, clothing, pet food, that kind of concept. I mean, we see it in public employees and school employees, the concept of a sick leave bank where you
we do help each other. We do help each other. But that fortunately, that you're absolutely right. That's the case. And people donated to food banks and donated in other ways. What I'm saying is it shouldn't be that fluid. It should be more structured so that there's never a question. And that maybe people who have can continue to donate in times when it's not needed. So it just seems to me there has to be a better way. And I'm not saying get rid of strikes. I'm not saying get rid of strikes. I'm saying that should be the final straw. That should be the path of last resistance under all circumstances, and it has to be justified. And if the parties are not negotiating in good faith, there should be a penalty for that.
There's also, on a couple of the points you made, first on the most recent point you just made about striking, I come from Wisconsin where collective bargaining rights were stripped from all public employees except for police and fire. And so it's a totally different world there. It's the other extreme where we're not even talking about not being able to strike. We're talking about not being able to negotiate. So obviously, I get what you're saying about striking being the very last thing on the table, which, of course, there's nothing else on the table, really. There's no table when you're striking. But I just want to point that out, that there are these other extremes in the country outside of New Jersey. Yeah. But kind of circling back to another point that you made as well about COVID and healthcare and things like that, and that kind of brought us around to this path, is that we really saw when COVID hit how bad of an idea it is to have your healthcare tied to your employment, because all these people are suddenly out of work during a health crisis. And those two things being put together really was a total disaster. And we've seen that in other situations like that, but maybe not in my lifetime, like that clearly, like, okay, we just lost 600,000 jobs. Those people all lost their health care. And it's a massive health crisis. It's an epidemic. I mean, that just showed how bad of an idea it is.
It's expensive. If you're not working, how can you pay for COVID?
Exactly.
We all, the four of us, we can fix the world.
We're doing it right now.
If only.
We're doing it right now. We can fix all this, but our time is up. I so enjoyed this, and I really do appreciate the three of you taking the time, because you don't know me, but you readily agreed to do it. And I'm glad that you didn't take me up on, well, maybe I should do you individually, because this has been fun. This is my first panel for 3-box interview. And I think I'll do this. My dentist, this is an aside, my dentist, a lovely man. Whenever I'm in the chair, my son is a rock star. And I'm thinking, oh, he's such a nice man. His son is blowing smoke. He's telling him he's a rock star. He really isn't. So he kept telling me, I said, okay, doctor, you say your son's a rock star. No, he really is. His son is a rock star. He's been written up in the New York Times. I say to my godchild, have you ever heard of this band? She starts screaming. I said, what do you know about this band? Oh, maybe you've heard of them, the people in Philadelphia. Modern Baseball. Have you ever heard? Well,
I have.
Sean Huber, I interviewed him for my podcast because his father is my dentist. So I'm going to interview them a second time, but together. And now that I've done this, I know if I can do 3, I can do 2.
Happy to be of help.
Thank you so much. And before you leave, what brief advice like 1 or 2 sentences, what would you advise people who find themselves looking for a job or uncertain about a job? Just briefly. We like to leave people with a nugget.
Well, I think I'll circle back to something you said early on, Beverly. There is nothing more foundational than finding community with other people.
Yeah.
You will find answers to questions you never thought you had, and there's nothing like collective power. And so I think at the core of everything, unionism or not, I think really just tapping into your communities to find opportunities that you might not have thought were there is going to be really foundational to any path forward. And so I advise people to, if you have any curiosities, to ask around because you'll find answers in unexpected places.
Great. Yes, that's true.
Yeah,
Dan?
I would say to anyone looking for a job, maybe it's obvious coming from us, but look for a union job. You'll make 20% more. You're 20% more likely to have retirement benefits and a pension. You're 20% more likely to have medical benefits and have those medical benefits be good. You're more likely to be offered paid sick leave, employee assistance programs, paid jury leave, and this is coming from the Department of Treasury and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So 20% more likely to have all of that.
Okay, Dan, sell it. Sell it, Dan. Hop.
And did you mention the 17% wage premium on average and closing the racial wealth gap and gender wage gap and job protection, including legal assistance? But as for my point, so I think we've covered that. The only other thing that I can possibly add to that, keeping it as brief and uncynical as possible, I can just say my advice would be yourself and don't sell your soul unless you're desperate.
Good advice. Thank you, all three of you, so much. I sincerely appreciate it. And I know that anyone listening will walk away with a nugget, even if some of what I said seems like nothing they want to hear. Well, my father's no longer with us, so I know he's not, I don't have to worry about him. But thank you again. And until next time.
Thank you so much, Beverly.
Thanks, Beverly.
Thanks for having us, Beverly.
Thanks for listening to Your Employment Matters with Beverly Williams. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. I truly appreciate your support, and that helps other listeners find the podcast. If you have a comment, question, or suggestion, you can reach me at baWilliams@youremploymentmatters.com. My book, Get the Job Done, is available on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. Please join me again next week. Until then, remember to embrace change and differences.
This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM, women's voices amplified.